We live in our own heads. I think it is our conception of the world, our memories, our inner thoughts that determine how we feel, how we think, how we act, what matters. I think the point at which those inner thoughts are most vulnerable to change, are most able to be affected, are at the end of the relationship, because that is the moment at which you are most vulnerable. That is the moment that you will remember. That is why it matters more. I'm going to start with some setup, then 2 points for you. Firstly, why we think we get uniquely impactful emotional damage when endings are particularly bad, and secondly, why we think that the ending of the relationship shapes you far more going forward. Starting then with some setup. Firstly, I think it's important to note that it is the way and the nature of these relationships or of the endings that matters. I think we're therefore looking at what is the difference between the best possible ending and the worst possible ending, between the variety of endings that generally exist compared to the variety of continuations. I think, secondly, what are the metrics that we think this debate is going to be decided on? We think it is firstly the emotions and the feelings that you experience, and it is secondly what causes people to change their decision making and the way that they act. Okay, next then. I think it's important to note that relationships relative to your life are largely very short. I think that most friendships don't last, right? I think that people move away, I think they fall out. I think that most romantic relationships that you experience in your life are relatively short. They last less than 5, less than 10 years. I think that even your long-term relationships increasingly end in divorce. There are very few relationships that are actually going to last the majority of your life. I therefore think that for most relationships, what happens after they end, the way that they shape you going forward is going to be much more important, because in almost all cases you have the vast majority of your life still standing before you. Finally then, we don't think that the length of the relationship necessarily indicates the importance. We think that even small, short relationships are still incredibly important, far more so than they relatively are to their length. I think this is because each relationship and each person that you have a relationship with occupies a certain amount of space in your understanding of yourself. We think that each person you have a conception about and you have an idea of your relationship that is outsized compared to the length of that. Okay. Moving then into my first point on why I think we get uniquely impactful emotional damage. Note that when it is a really, really bad ending to a relationship, when it is a really terrible breakup, we think that this consumes you for days or weeks on end. I think this is a time when you are incredibly vulnerable. Why is this? I think this is firstly because you have to reconsider your entirety of your life, because a large portion of your life has probably been spent, if it's an important relationship to you, with this person has probably shaped how you spend your time. That's now suddenly ended. Secondly, I think the ending is often, in the worst cases, incredibly sudden, and so you don't know what's coming, and so you have to deal with all of these repercussions immediately and at once. I think thirdly, it breaks the emotional trust that you feel with yourself, because you feel like if it's ended badly, if the other person has told you, look, you're a horrible person, I hate this relationship, I want to end it, then that makes you feel like you yourself are bad at a relationship. You feel like your fundamental ideas about what you're good at as a person, about your self-worth, have been challenged and broken down, and you have to go and try and rebuild them. And fourthly, I think you are grieving for the thing that you had that is now over. I think we see this especially in things like death, where grief is incredibly powerful because the relationship and the experiences you had with someone is now over. Okay, I'll take the POI now.
If you feel so awful at the end of a relationship, is it not better to focus on all the positive things that happen throughout the duration of the relationship?
Okay, important thing about this debate. I think that because this house believes that this thing is more important than this thing, the thing that we need to talk about is which one matters more to people, not which one they should believe matters more. I think even if it would be better in a world where people believe in their relationship mattering more, and if that shaped them, everyone would be happier, that simply isn't reality. We're going to show you that people are far more affected by the end of the relationship, thus it matters more, thus we're going to win. Okay. Why do I think that all of these formats I just gave you change massively based off the nature of the relationship? Because I think if a relationship ends really well, you don't get all of these harms because you don't get another person telling you that you are bad at relationships. It probably ends more gradually, you see it coming better. I think there are lots of relationships that do end in this way, and there are lots of relationships that end really badly that bring all of the terrible emotional damage that I've talked to you about. Okay, this means that I think you feel a huge amount of difficult emotions over a really short time. I think this is an outcome in itself. But notably, this is all-consuming. Why does it make it particularly important? Because if you are feeling emotional damage over a large period of time, it's not all-consuming. You have other distractions in your life. You have time, presumably, when you're not constantly spending it with this person. I think, therefore, even in the most abusive relationships, you still have time away from that person. You still have abilities to talk to other people and to do some coping mechanisms and to have some kind of rational thought. I don't think that exists in a world where you're all consumed by the end of your relationship, because you simply don't have a moment where your brain isn't thinking about this. You don't have a moment where you're able to step back and actually take yourself out of this and think about it more rationally. Okay, what does this mean? I think this means that the harm that can come to you therefore is far greater, because you're able to be put in a far more vulnerable position where all of these words, all of these abuses that you get given at the end of your relationship have a much larger effect on you because you're not able to escape them, you're not able to talk to someone else. Thirdly, I think you're uniquely stuck in your own head, because in this situation, it's very difficult for anyone to understand exactly what you're going through when it comes to the end of a relationship, because that is always going to be a unique experience. They can't put themselves in that moment in the same position of you being all encompassed by this. I think there's very little they can do to get you out of your head. But secondly, I think that this notably is incredibly irreversible, because even if you're in a really, really bad relationship, you have the hope that it's going to maybe change. You can talk to this person and convince them to do better, or even just to leave. I think that when you're stuck in this weeks and weeks on end of being in a really terrible ending, there is no clear escape for you. There's no way for you to step out. You have none of this hope. Okay, what does this mean? I think this means that there is a huge impact on people emotionally, but also I think there is a massive capacity for this to affect you and for this to change how you see yourself, as I'll now get into in my second point. Secondly, why the end of the relationship shapes you more going forward. Firstly, note that I think the things that you hear at the end of a relationship shape massively how you see yourself, because they shape what you think that you are good at doing in a relationship. They shape how you think relationships should go, what has been working well, what hasn't. I think this means that when you take this away and you go and start a new relationship, you're always going to be thinking about these things that were said to you at the end of your previous relationships, the things that they said that you do badly, the ways that they said that you're bad at your relationship. Okay. Note, secondly, that I think all of these things matter incredibly more than anything that happened throughout the duration of the relationship, because we inherently have a recency bias. I think that when you're at the end of a relationship, the takeaways you take away from it are always going to be from the end, because that is the thing that is fixed in your mind, but also because it is so intense, as I told you, and so these memories are so strong, right? I think that all of the small little ice cream dates to Masterton that you did over the course of your relationship probably aren't going to make a big difference, because they're not as strong, because you can easily forget most of them, right? Okay. Secondly, I think that if any relationship ends badly, then all of the things that you learned are in the relationship, if Megs wants to claim that you gained a bunch of learnings and a bunch of skills from being in a relationship, I don't think they can, because I think this is contingent on the relationship ending well. Because when the relationship ends badly, I think you recognize that all of these new hobbies that you have, all of these new skills you inherently associate with this person, all of the new music that you love, you associate with them, and thus you feel an urge to give them up. I think this means that they can't claim any of these things. Okay. What do I think then are the outcomes of this point? I think the way that your relationship ends changes the way that you see everything. It changes the way that you see yourself, both in these few weeks afterwards when you're going through it, but also into the future, because every new relationship you go into, it is the memories of your past ones that have shaped it. I think notably, the difference in how much this the difference in how this relationship can end is incredibly massive. Because in the best possible scenario, a relationship ends brilliantly, and so you don't have any of this emotional harm. You're able to walk away with all the things that you learn. You're able to walk away secure in the fact that you're a good person who can have a good relationship and do normal things. I think in the worst case, you end up absolutely distraught for weeks. You have to rebuild your entire life, to re-question yourself. I think this massively changes how you act.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the first negating speaker.
When moving on or growing as a person, it matters far more than what led to an impact. For example, divorce over the divorce itself. So when you focus on the outcome, you lose the ability to acknowledge the ups and downs and your ability to grow and like your behaviour as a person. A few things in the speech. Firstly, on setup. Secondly, on the ability to move on in life. And then like thirdly, on how relationships last more matters more. And then secondly, on how we get healthier closure. Okay, firstly on setup. How do relationships end? Firstly, the vast majority of relationships naturally end neutrally. This looks like a mutual agreement that the relationship doesn't work anymore. Like if one person tends to have an issue in a relationship, they're not feeling the spark anymore. This tends to happen with both people. But B, it looks like just natural reasons, such as moving away, losing feelings. It's never a good experience, but people understand. Even if you have like a few days of grief, eventually you realise it's not that relevant and you get over it. But secondly, you have relationships that actively end on good terms. You're still close friends, but not dating anymore. You reach out to an old friend every year for his birthday and catch up. No, in this instance, this relationship hasn't ended. They still have a personal relationship, and like this is just in a slightly different form, so we think like this sort of falls out of the debate bit. But thirdly, in more extreme cases, relationships end negatively. This looks like A, a family member dies and you have like grief surrounding that. But B, more really, you have like a toxic relationship where you have a big fallout and you like need to leave. So what does a relationship lasting look like? Note that a relationship is never permanent. It doesn't like work out or you die are always things that are looming over the head of a relationship. This means that we think a relationship lasting is the entire relationship leading up to the point of like it ending. So and what do we think like a relationship mattering looks like? Firstly, individual happiness. Secondly, like behaviour, the way you act, the happiness you have with future relationships going forward. This looks like being confident in a new relationship, but being comfortable without this relationship, feeling happy, like not dwelling on the past. But thirdly, having good memories. Like, I think the goal of life is to be on your deathbed and to be able to look back and go, wow, I'm so proud of this life that I lived. And this is why you want these memories to be good, or at least to be, like, impactful. Okay, so before I move on, I'll take a POI.
Do you think that you're personally think that you're a great person who operates well within relationships if you're told, like, during your divorce, that you're absolutely horrific at communicating and, like, have ruined your partner's life?
I think if you, like, are so bad at communicating, you probably were so bad at communicating throughout the marriage, you think this was probably led up into the point to the ending. I don't think this is, like, that relevant. But firstly, how, like, relationships that last matter so much more. Like, contextually, like, the times, like, relationships last are, like, A, generally longer. Like, your relationship with your parents is practically your whole life. They've raised you since you were born. But also things like loving relationships can last, like, heaps of years. You can have children together. You can have things like that are very long relationships that do end through things like death or, like, unexpected events. But B, it is very personal. You spend a lot of time together when you are in a relationship. You go out for dates, you may live together, you have memories, you like maybe held hands or something. And this is just like all so impactful. So like, why does this matter more? Firstly, it is an amalgamation of every high and low and every struggle that you like overcame. On the comparative, your like relationship is representative of the one time you could not fix like the issue you were going through. It is representative of this failure that you had. But secondly, it like your relationship lasting has played a pivotal role in wider life. It's that boyfriend who like got you the job you have now because he pushed you to go get a promotion. It's your parents teaching you how like what manners are and like how to act. It's like comparatively, this is like a breakup is just exclusively between two people, and like the impacts it has is just sort of like not as wide as like the friends you make through your boyfriend, etc. But like thirdly, it is like generally like a long period of your life. Or even if it is small, it is significant. Like you experience good things, you have memories. So what does this mean? Firstly, regardless of quality of the relationship, it has still played a significant part of your life. The relationship. The relationship of nostalgia is always more impactful than the nostalgia of grieving the end. But this looks like the way your mum used to hug you and the way she taught you to behave and have manners before the month she was deteriorating on her deathbed. But it looks like how your high school relationship teaches you how to function and act within future relationships, how to resolve arguments. These things have such a significant role in your life. It doesn't matter that they may have ended badly if it's taught you these skills throughout. But this means it teaches you, it influences your actions, your thoughts, you as your person. But even if it's not, it was just such a interconnected experience with other factors. This means when Af says that the length doesn't dictate the impact, it still has quite a large level of impact if you think it influences your actions as a person, how you behave going on. Okay, secondly, how we get healthier closure. Note that a relationship ending is never the most amazing experience ever. This looks like your grandma not being able to remember you on her deathbed because she has dementia. This is so impactful to you because you feel you don't have this connection with her at the end. She's forgotten who you are. Or a relationship turning into constant bickering and losing feelings for each other. So how does this, the end, inhibit your ability to move on? Firstly, it's much harder to feel closure. The relationship at the end isn't the same as the relationship at the start. This means when you now can look on, it matters so much more to be able to look at the relationship in a whole, look at where things went wrong, know that your grandma loved you, you want to hold on to this. This is so much more important to you than when the fact that she couldn't talk to you at the end. You want to remember that time she told you she was proud of you. And but secondly, you have the harm of that you could be too clouded by judgment or resent. This looks like when your boyfriend cheats on you at the end, instead of moving on because you recognize there was a lot of factors leading up to this, you stalk his new girlfriend, you shit talk him behind his back. And when a bad ending, this is when a bad ending gets worse and gets more drawn out, when you can't look at the relationship as a whole. This is why it matters so much to be looking at these other factors, looking at these other arguments. It's so much more impactful for someone in a toxic relationship to flinch every time someone raises their arm because of the significant long-lasting relationship, rather than the one time they got hit and then left. It's the long relationship that built up into this. This is why the moot shall fall.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second affirmative speaker to continue the debate.
The negating side cannot tell you that most relationships end mutually when the entire discography of artists like Taylor Swift and Olivia Rodrigo is literally about breakups, right? We think this is largely untrue. We think most relationships, even if they do end mutually, do leave you with a massive emotional impact. This is really reflected on all the art that we could possibly see. Okay, there are two questions when rebutting this, when rebutting the negating case, right? Firstly, the idea of what makes a relationship matter, whether it is the ending of the relationship or like the things that happen while you were in this relationship. And then secondly, on this like point of like healthy closure and your ability to move on from like toxic relationships. Okay. Firstly, on what makes it matter, this is the stuff that we heard the most like content about, right? What the negating side try to tell you is that like what you leave with when you leave a relationship is the good memories that you had. It's like the good times that you spent in this relationship. These are the things that you carry with you, and these are the things that really matter. And they also told you that like most relationships are actually quite long, so like the volume of these impacts are really, really big, right? Okay, we think that it is somewhat true, right? Like we think that the things that you carry away from a relationship do really matter. We think that they're right with this way. But the problem is, what they have not considered is, all the things that you're carrying away from a relationship, all the good memories, are actually contingent on the ending, right? They gave you the example of like a relationship with your parents. That's like a really long relationship. You learn a lot of things from this relationship, right? There's two ways that relationship ends. Both of them probably involve death. But A, you have like a massive fight with your parents before they died, and therefore the thing that you remember is the fact that like when they died, you were not in a good place with them. We think what this means is every time you think of a memory of someone that you loved very much, the thing that you're going to remember is, oh my God, I can't believe I let that end so badly, right? We think this will cloud all of the positive impacts that they try to give you that you're going to get from the length of this relationship. Or B, like, you actually get a good ending, right? You were in a good place with your parents when they passed away. That means now you can actually take all the good impacts and actually carry them with you throughout your life. What we get at the end of this point is all of these impacts are actually contingent on the ending of the relationship. Okay. And then like on the minor point of like the fact that like holding hands with your partner is nice and that's like the thing that you will remember. Like I said, that memory is contingent on the ending. And also, as we said to you, a lot of relationships are actually quite short. So this like the volume of time being really big isn't actually that important in this debate, because we think that like most romantic relationships that people go through are actually quite short. Therefore, like there is actually a lot of times where you are facing a breakup. Therefore, that like emotional impact stuff that Thomas told you about at first still really stands, because you actually do get a lot of breakups. Most people probably do get a lot of relationships ending in their life, and therefore that emotional trauma of that cannot be completely outweighed in this debate. Okay. And then secondly, this idea of like healthy closure, right? They tell you, firstly they give you an example of like your grandma not remembering you on their deathbed, and like this is really, really bad, and if you're only focused on the ending, this is the thing that you remember, and therefore that relationship is entirely clouded. Okay, firstly we think that this doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad ending, right? We think that like most people have the mental like capacity to understand that like people getting old, like dementia's a thing, and that like people may not remember you in the same way that, you know, in the same way that most of the memories you have with them are. That doesn't mean that this isn't immediately a bad ending, right? Because you don't think that your grandma like actually hates you or something. You just are capable of understanding that this is how this will end. But like because that ending, like you are still in a place where you can be at their deathbed. Therefore, this is not a bad ending. So like this harm doesn't stand, right? Okay. And then like they try to like explain to you that if you're solely focused on the ending, this is like a really unhealthy way to live, because then you like don't consider the good impacts of like the relationship, right? We think that maybe this is true, right? Maybe we should all just like not cry because it's over and smile because it happened, right? But we don't think this is what people do, right? This debate is not what people should do. It's about what people actually behave like in the real world. And therefore it doesn't actually matter if they try to prove to you like it is healthier to like only focus on the relationship itself and not the ending, because that's not what people actually do, as we've proven to you, right? All the healthy impacts that they tell you about are actually contingent on ending. Okay.
POI.
Sure.
Do you not think people have very strong memories within these relationships that they hold on to through the like entirety of the relationship? Which, like, do you not think they would then last until after like the relationship is ended?
I'm not saying that those memories won't last, right? I'm just saying that like any impact that you get from those memories are going to be inevitably clouded by the ending of that relationship. Okay. And then this idea of like this point that we heard about like physical abuse, right? We heard this idea that like people who have been in really abusive relationships, it's the time that they spent in that relationship that really, really matters, that impacts them. We think this is like Firstly, we think these cases are so unique that they're somewhat symmetrical on both sides of the house because they're not necessarily a good reflection of like how most relationships operate and how most people in the world operate. But secondly, what makes an abusive relationship often really painful for someone after they've gotten out of this relationship is that feeling of humiliation, right? It's the idea that I stayed in this relationship, that I am someone who deserves to be treated this way, that I am someone who has been so humiliated. That is the thing that people really, really carry, right? So the only way that you get like any kind of positive impact is through the ending, right? Because the ending gives you hope. It lets you know that no, I actually can get out of this relationship, right? And we think that is the message that people ultimately end up carrying. And we think this is an instant where like the fact that people only care about the ending is probably a really beneficial thing. Okay, now moving on to my split, which is the idea that like because society cares more about the ending of the relationship, that means that inevitably the ending of the relationship is what matters to you. Okay. The point is, society really just cares about the ending of a relationship, right? That is how society weighs like relationships when they see like other people's relationships. Okay, mix for this. Firstly, like think about wedding vows, right? The closing remark is till death do us part. Subconsciously, you're accepting that the ending is inevitable. What you're promising is that the ending that we will have is not going to be a bad ending because we like disagree with each other and move on. No, it's going to be a good ending because to the end, our relationship like when we end this relationship, it will be because like death was the thing that ended it, not ourselves. That is like everyone that gets married accepting the fact that the ending of this relationship really matters to me and I promise to you I won't make it awful for you. Okay. Secondly, the second make of this is that like people simply just ask about the ending of a relationship more, right? If you talk about your ex, people aren't going to ask if you had a great relationship. They're most probably going to ask, how did you break up, right? This is what people constantly ask about. And because you're constantly answering this question, it is what you yourself think about, right? You internalize all these questions. Therefore, you as an individual probably care more about the breakup of a relationship after it has ended, right? And then thirdly, I alluded to this in my intro, but like breakup songs, right? Like constantly in society, the fact that like most of music is about breakups is clear proof that as society we're telling ourselves that we should really care about like when a relationship ends. This is a time to be really sad and like listen to Phoebe Bridgers in your blanket, right? Therefore, that ends up being a thing that we actually do care about because we are greatly impacted by this messaging, right? Okay. So, like, the end of this point, the outcome is that because society is constantly telling you that a relationship, the true metric of a relationship's value is how it ended. It's the fact that you, like, didn't get divorced. No, you, like, saw it out till the end. Or, like, you know, you left your staff at their house. That is the thing that people end up caring about because public perception really matters, especially in romantic relationships. And therefore, we're going to this today. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the second negating speaker.
The end to any relationship is never going to be an enjoyable experience. But those few conversations and maybe a couple of weeks of sadness will never outweigh years of shared experiences, years of arguments, years of good memories together, and years of contributing to each other's lives. Taylor Swift can write songs about being sad, but that doesn't take away from the quality of that relationship and the reason that she is sad to begin with. So a few points in this debate. Firstly, look, we hear a lot about vulnerability, about how you feel vulnerable and alone in a short period of time, right? look, they kind of weigh this against like the diluted idea of like having broader life going on in our side of the house. But firstly, I just think this is quite contradictory, right? Because this means that the depth of emotion is not as significant as they claim on their side of the house, right? Because if on our side you can still feel emotion and vulnerability in the midst of your busy life and all of the things going on, then there's clearly a far deeper emotional connection with your partner or your friend going on if you're willing to sustain that emotional connection despite everything you have going on in your life. What this means then is that all they do have on their side of the house is just this spark of like insignificant anger or grief. Why is this not real? A, because it's replaceable, right? You can supplement that grief and that anger by getting a friend to comfort you. You don't feel alone. You don't feel vulnerable when you have an arm around your shoulder. Versus, on our side, you have uniquely formed memories with a partner that you could not get anywhere else, a lifetime of joy that's really significant. But B, because this anger and grief is extremely irrational, right? You quickly realize that you aren't a failure. You didn't solely cause the end of a relationship, right? It's just dramatized by Taylor Swift. You realize after a couple of weeks of eating some ice cream that you aren't the problem and that you actually had this like significant relationship that did matter more than that one conversation that caused the end of the relationship. But secondly, these people we just think that people aren't that vulnerable in these moments anyways, right? We tell you at Layla that A, these breakups are often neutral, right? Like the end of a friendship comes naturally when you move across the country and you simply can't keep up contact, right? But B, that even if they weren't, that they're like not that extreme, right? Like not every breakup is like a yelling match and like abusive, right? It just looks like having an adult conversation and agreeing that you aren't in the same place in life and that you need to move on. But even if it was severe, then there would have been severities in the long continuation to begin with, right? We tell you at Layla that in instances where you do have an abusive relationship, there have been fights throughout the whole relationship. So if they want to claim benefits on vulnerability and like trauma, then we get more of that on our side because we have more fights, because we have like people don't just break up after the first fight, right? Look, at the end, I have more. Thirdly, it's only accessible to one side of the relationship, right? So even if they do believe that vulnerability is an important mechanism to measure what matters, it's only accessible to one person who was the victim of that breakup. At least on our side of the house, both sides can access the depth of the continuation, the depth of memories and shared trauma, because they both have those memories. We think that this matters far more on scale. So at the end of this, you should believe that firstly, this vulnerability is not real, but secondly, even if it was, it's not that deep, but also that thirdly, it doesn't affect that many people. Okay, then look, they tell us, like they're trying to weigh this against like relationships being short of like 5 to 10 years. Look, firstly, let's take this characterization and just sort of flip it, because that's a significant amount of time, right? The average person lives to what, like 90, so that's a whole 9th of your life. Like, are we kidding? That's like, in that whole time, you've gone through an education system, you've got a career, you've built your entire life while you're in this relationship. We tell you that by association, that has to matter the most. This is a person who has played a crucial part in your life, especially if we're talking about like parents and caregivers who actively like look after you and raise you to be the person you are and like shape your identity. How can they tell us that that relationship doesn't matter? Look, and then they tell us that like it's going to challenge this perspective of your identity. Look, I just want to tell you here that like, no, you're far more likely to just be angry. Why does this not matter? Why is this true? Because you selfishly don't want to blame yourself, right? This looks like going out and like keying your boyfriend's car as an act of like rejecting the fact that you could be responsible for the relationship ending, right? But why does this anger not matter? Because it doesn't require you to rebuild your life, right? Like just because you're angry for a week doesn't mean you change careers or you change anything you're doing with your life. Like maybe you move out, but you just go stay with your family for a week until you find another flat. Like it's really not that significant. It happens all the time. People can deal with it. The trauma that they sustain throughout the relationship is far deeper. I'll take a point.
Can people not say things that they do not mean, things that are not premeditated when they're going through an incredibly traumatic breakup that still cause trauma to the other person?
People, like, the problem with your guys' case is it's like completely symmetrical, every benefit you give us, right? Like people can say things they don't mean when they're having a fight during their relationship, right? That still matters. It's unclear why people do it more on your side. Like if you can still be vulnerable in the midst of a fight where you think you're going to break up before you do, right? It's just like completely symmetrical. So look, then then they give us this point on like recency bias. Look, but like this is just a short-term harm, right? Like maybe you dwell on it for a week, but then you like prefer continuation. They never explain why you get like this severity or like like why it should be like scaled or anything, right? Like. So yeah, I'm going to do my substantive contribution here as an extension. So why do people care more about continuation on our side? Firstly, because they have like an association with their wider life, right? This looks like the nostalgia they tell us. Like you hear a shared favorite song or you get a Facebook memory, right? This is far more frequent than people just like asking how your breakup went. We think people are more likely to be sensitive, that it's like a sensitive issue, and more likely to remind you of the positives of that relationship, and you're more likely to remind yourself through these forms of nostalgia. But secondly, that there's a significant, they've played a significant contribution to your life, right? Like we think that these long-term positives that actively contribute to not only your life during that period, but also to your future will outweigh any short-term harms of like a recency bias in the short term, right? Because you think about how your parents taught you how to ride your bike, or like you think about how they drove you to your promotion that like got you your career, or like how they made that phone call that set you up for life. That is a far more active incentive to think about than just like some short-term irrational anger. But thirdly, there's a desire to reminisce, right? Humans innately want to be happy, right? You innately want to be connected and feel like you get along with people, and you innately want to feel like you haven't wasted your life, right? You want to look back and see the good things and like reminisce about that, right? So we think that this means that maybe even in the short term they do choose to be sad for a week, but in the long term they're more likely to still go back and remember the good moments because they want to feel happy. They want to feel like they didn't just waste 10 years of their life on a useless relationship. But fourthly, even if they are unhappy with the relationship, they still have a desire to reflect, right? You still want to remember the bad times so you can learn from it. So you can see the signs of how your boyfriend became toxic, and you can learn and create better future relationships. Look, Layla does a lot of work here to tell you how this can shape future relationships, how you can protect yourself in the future, and how it can help you engage with people by getting more closure. I think this is important analysis because because it means that we win on like both sides before the breakup and after the breakup, because it's far more likely that these things shape your future. At the end of this, I think it's just more likely that people are actively incentivized to think about prioritize thinking about continuation, and it should matter more because it has more impact on their life.
I thank the speaker for their speech and invite up the third affirmative speaker to close out the team's substantive contribution.
Look, your average person is going to cry because it happened and not smile because it's not is gonna cry because it's over and not smile because it happened. Okay, what do we need to do within this debate in order to win? I think that what we need to do is prove that the like thing that shapes the way that you absorb this like emotional damage from your relationships is how you break up. Like if you have a bad breakup, this affects your like self-confidence and how you move forward. And if you have a good breakup, you're able to like absorb all these like great learnings that Nick tells you about. I think that therefore we have to prove that the emotional damage from your relationship is like what comes, is like the most impactful like emotional damage from your relationship is what like comes through in your breakup. The like big defining moment is here, and therefore we have to prove, and therefore we can prove through all the great mechanisms you gave you, Thomas, that this like how this happens shifts the way that you act in the future. I think that we haven't heard that much response to like these things being like impactful within your life, how you act and how your confidence. Okay, first like just a little bit of direct response on like quickly the split that we heard. I think that this is like a crazy like split for like philosophical debating like relationship nerds where they like reflect deeply on their relationship and like write down 10 things they're grateful for in their like toxic boyfriend. I think that like one, most like rational people aren't going to be like doing this all the time and sitting down and doing like a meditating session where they're like, yeah, I'm so happy you told me all this stuff. I think that this is exemplified by the split that we give you at Safana, where people, I think that it contradicts the material where they tell you that you're just angry about your relationship and you're not like actually like thinking that hard and that you'll like get over in 2 weeks. I think that like that material is contradictory. And then secondly, I think that we're able to like exemplify this with our split Safana. When we tell you that like society perpetuates that the only thing that you should care about is the ending, how it ends, we think that like this is a thing that is widely reflected when like all your friends ask you like, why did you and your boyfriend break up? Like I thought you guys were so good. I think that this is really, really impactful. I don't think they're like, yo, can you name 5 things that you learned from your boyfriend so that I can adopt them in my relationship in the future? We think that this is what people focus on. We think that the split is ridiculous. Okay, therefore, and then like secondly, now moving on to like why people care more about like emotional damage from breakups instead of like arguments like within their relationship and why these are like more impactful in their future. We think that like firstly like within your relationship when you have like arguments, these severities aren't as impactful. Why? Because one, we think that like the fights that you have within your relationship are always like balanced out by like good things within your relationship. Your like big crazy fight is like evened out by like the ice cream date you went on like a week beforehand. We think that this is like net neutral in the end for like within like most relationships. And secondly, we think that like the other thing here is that like what you get from this is also like even when you have like the worst argument of your relationship, we think that like in order to continue your relationship, this is like counteracted by your like evil boyfriend apologizing the next day with some like bribe gift, trying to be like, please take me back. We think that like he like apologizes for everything he says and like tries to fix the relationship because otherwise he would break up and therefore like cop all the harms. And then thirdly, we think that like people like within these relationships, if they don't want to break up, are like invested in like ensuring the longevity of the relationship, like they tell you, and therefore like I think that they're like unlikely to like express their full mind because they like want to continue the relationship, and therefore they're like less likely to say like mega harmful things.
Yeah, what?
And it's, okay, and then therefore why do they get more emotional damage from breakups themselves? We think that like all of these things don't exist. You don't get any like clarity on like what has happened. We think that all the mechs that we tell you, Thomas, still stand here, where you have like recency bias in your relationship. We think Safana's split is still great and stands, that people like tell you all these, that this is what matters. We think that like, you never get any closure. 2, it's like hyper-focused on within society. 3, this is a big emotional shift in your life, and therefore like when you have to like go and get your clothes from your boyfriend's like drawer, it's really, really harmful for you. We think that you're like most likely to focus on like why this relationship ended. We think that you're most likely to like absorb the most emotional damage from here. I'll take a while now before I move on.
Given how vulnerable and sad you apparently are on the affirming side, why wouldn't you be more likely to fall back into toxic relationships?
I think because the thing here is that like, if you like break up with your like evil ex-boyfriend and you're really, really sad and angry about it, we think that like you're likely, like if you have like a really, really bad ending to your relationship, you're most likely to like reject all this toxicity that you're like, look, this was evil and then this evil guy broke up with me. And so therefore like I reject all of these like traits because that's all associated with this like one like mechanism of evilness within your life. And therefore I think you're like more likely to reject in the future and like go for something like completely opposite. Okay, now on to like response to this like point that they give at their like second point at first, which is like your high school boyfriend's gonna get you like a job and he's gonna teach you how to communicate and you're gonna be like have all these like joyous skills in the future. Okay, what do we think? Firstly, we think that we have like really clearly proven that your ability to do this is dependent on like what you take away from the relationship. E.g., even if you like learn epic communication skills, when he like tells you that you like absolutely suck at the end of your relationship, this is like a massive confidence hit. We think that like you're not gonna think that you're great even if you have like subconscious great communication skills. We think that like in the future, within your future relationships, you can be like really, really nervous to like open up and communicate because you've been told that you like suck at it. We think that this like impacts the way that you see yourself. We think this is like extra true because like words matter more than your like deep philosophical introspect about what you learned from your relationship. We think this is like more likely to stick with you. We think it's like more tangible within your life. Okay. And then secondly on this like they're gonna like set up like a job for you and then this is like really important within your life. Primarily we think again this is contingent on how you view the relationship. We think like if you have the worst breakup ever, then like you're gonna be like shit, I hate my job, like I just want to leave, I want to get out of here. Like it just reminds me of my boyfriend. I have to every time I listen to like this one song, it just reminds me of him. Therefore we think that like this is all contingent on like how you view your relationship. And maybe if it even is like impactful within your life, we don't think that like we think that the way that you view it afterwards, because I think we've like clearly expressed that like, this isn't taking over your whole life, is going to be far more impactful. And then like the things, and we also think that like maybe don't think that your boyfriend's gonna set up your whole life for you. Like I think that that's kind of a crazy thing to say. Like I think that there are other things that happen within these 10 years that are also impactful. We think that like you can do things on your own. We think that like we don't think this is like as strong as they like say it is. Therefore, what like matters at the end of this, I think that it's really, really important that you know that the thing that even if you think that we should be focusing on the good times and the ice cream dates, that the only way that people like process and look back on their relationships is going to be through the lens of how they broke up, is going to be through like through the way that they broke up, the way that they view all these positive experiences and all this new learning that Afra's like telling you about is solely through the lens of how you break up. Therefore, your ability to absorb this, your ability to like better yourself in the future, the way that you act in the future, the way that you even like do your philosophical introspect on your relationship is all contingent on the way if you like think that you're a person who's good at relationships, if you think that you're like able to like find love again. We think that these are all characterized by the way that you break up, and therefore like any way that you act in the future, which is we think is super important because it's so impactful on the rest of your life outside of the relationship. We think it's impactful on all the other relationships you're in, even if, like e.g. if this is a romantic relationship, it's impactful on your friendships and your family relationships. It's contingent on the way that you're in this one relationship. We think over time this accumulates and shapes you as a person. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for this speech and invite up third negating to close out the debate.
To quote Miley Cyrus, it's not about what's waiting on the other side, it's the climb. Whether the person realizes it or not, the changes they went through during the relationship impacts them far more than the final fight that ended the relationship. This is what matters more in this debate. So I'm going to go through 2 points of clash on what actually matters more and how people internalize this. So firstly, on what matters more, they said that the ending matters more because there's the biggest impact and you don't have like a single moment where you're not thinking about the breakup and it just feels more important to the person. I've got 5 responses to this. Firstly, if a relationship lasts 2 years, that's a longer time of change. This is like even if they're incredibly impacted by the last fight, like that's nothing compared to 2 years of manipulation by a toxic boyfriend. Like even in the even if in the moment the breakup feels bigger, as time goes on, that becomes such a small moment compared to the 2 years you spent with that person getting manipulated or getting abused. And a year, like this means that in a year's time, you go to the ice cream shop and you do remember your weekly dates there because it happened over a longer period of time. You don't just forget about these because of like the 2-day fight that and then the 1 week after that where you're a bit sad. You remember the year long of like going there every single day after work. And then note that like if a relationship was so short that the breakup like impacted you more because it lasted longer, it probably wasn't that important enough of a relationship for either thing to matter, so this falls out of the debate. So then, secondly, when moving on to new relationships, you're obviously going to focus more on the content of the past ones. This looks like seeing early signs of toxicity. This looks like your new boyfriend getting you flowers, and you compare it to this old relationship of your like boyfriend not getting you flowers. You're gonna like once again, when you were like sad that your ex-boyfriend didn't get you flowers for 2 years, you're gonna care about that more in new relationships than like the 1 day fight that you had with your ex-boyfriend. You guys broke up. And then thirdly, they like had this push about how like your ex-husband will like say you're awful during the divorce, and will like feel really bad about this. Like if your relationship gets to that point where you're like spewing hate at each other during the breakup, then you're also likely angry. That if you're not gonna internalize it that much, you probably don't weigh the opinion of your ex-husband that highly if you're having that many fights. And then even if they do, it's only like a short-term impact, because then like Ollie said a second, like a month passes and you're like, wait, we were actually both kind of bad to each other in that relationship. What he said wasn't actually a reflection of who I am as a person, it's how he was feeling in that moment. And then fourth, they said that you're like more vulnerable in that moment, so you're gonna care about it. Like a week just focusing on your breakup is far less impactful than the years you spent like hiding in the bathroom at work because your boyfriend's abusing you at home. Like even if you have other things going on in your life during the relationship, you're still going to be focusing on this. If you're living with your boyfriend of 10 years, he's got a pretty large impact in your life. Yes, you can do things by yourself, but if you go home every night to your husband hitting you, you're going to focus on this a lot more than like the breakup. Like this 10 years of being sad is going to impact you a lot more than like the final divorce. And then fifthly, we told you like most ends are neutral. Like this just means there's not as big of an impact. Like if this looks like your partner just like moving away, you're not going to spend like 2 months, like 2 years of your life focusing on how your boyfriend of 3 years like left and moved to the other side of the country for his work. You're going to focus on the happy years that you had together. This is what's actually going to impact you. This is what you're going to go for, and this is what matters. When you're 25, you're not thinking about how your high school boyfriend cheated on you. You're thinking about the wholesome ice cream dates you went on every Friday after school and the joy that it brought you. You're thinking about how this like got you through stressful times like exams. You don't care that a 16-year-old cheated on you, because that's not what matters to you anymore. And then even if you don't believe that the content of relationship matters more immediately, we still win on longevity, because the impact of the relationship just lasts longer because it happens over a longer period, and we win on severity because 3 years of someone calling you an idiot is going to mean more than the one time they said it during the divorce. This is where it matters more. This is where the person's life is impacted more. And then even if the person internally feels like the breakup mattered more because they're like super angry about it and they like are like, yeah, my life was ruined because of this breakup, it doesn't actually. Like the partner, like this looks like the partner encouraging them to get a promotion. This like caused change at work. This looks like a deadbeat dad still like raising them for a little while. What does this mean? This means that even if in their mind the breakup impacted them more, it actually didn't. They were more fundamentally changed by what happened during the relationship. This is the reason why they're actually so sad about the breakup. Like you have to focus on what actually led to that end result instead of just that end result. And then they said that like they had this weird push about society caring about endings, like something like breakup songs. This was just silly. Olivia Rodrigo doesn't write a whole 4-minute song about like the 10-minute fight she had with her ex-boyfriend. She writes about how she feels like she was manipulated and mistreated throughout the relationship. She sings about what led to this actual like breakdown of the relationship. This is far more weight on the content of the relationship. This is what matters more. I'll take a POI.
Doesn't society view a divorced relationship as a relationship that has failed, regardless of like the quality of the relationship itself?
I think that people are still gonna, like Ollie said a second, people immediately after a divorce, unless you're a very close friend, they're not like exactly asking you about the divorce. And even if they are asking you about the divorce, they're asking you why the divorce happened, what led up to the divorce. That is the contents of the relationship. This is where the contents of it matters more. They're not asking you what your ex-husband called you during your divorce court. They're asking you what your ex-husband did to you during the actual relationship. This point just doesn't make sense, because it just proves that people care more about what happened during the relationship. If my friend went through a breakup, I'm going to care more about how he treated her during the relationship than like the contents of their 1 hour long fight that actually like was them breaking up. Okay, on to the second point of Clash and how they internalize this. They said that like when you're focusing on the bad relationship, you're not going to take any of the good benefits from this relationship. This only happens when you're focusing on the ending of the relationship. If a guy that convinced you to start going to the gym cheats on you, you're not going to go to the gym if you're spending the whole time thinking about how this guy like manipulated you and like cheated on you, on our side, you think about how good you felt going to the gym with them during the relationship. This is when you continue good habits. This is like and no, this means that like, because it makes you feel good, you're incentivized to weigh this higher than like the sadness you felt when this guy cheated on you. This pushes them to move on from the breakup by focusing on the happy times in the relationship. Note here that they didn't really have any proper responses to all of Ollie's material on why people are incentivized to think more about the relationship, and therefore meaning it matters more because people are thinking about it more. All of Ash's material here relies on people drowning in sadness for the rest of their life. Otherwise, any impacts that they tried to claim, which we did prove wrong, are only short-term compared to the long-term impacts that we said that come from focusing on the relationship itself. This looks like someone only being sad for 2 weeks versus the good benefits they got from the relationship, like going to the gym every week, lasting them for the rest of their life. This means on our side that all of our benefits actually matter long-term. In 5 years, no one is asking you why you and your ex broke up, but so how does this relationship actually impact you long term? It looks like you being able to spot signs of toxicity early on in relationships because you've experienced that before. Like Ollie said, people want to feel happy, they want to move on. You can't do this on Af's side because you feel resentment, you want to take revenge, you want to go cut up your boyfriend's car because he cheated on you. To move on, you have to focus on the happy time, you have to learn to just enjoy the time that you had together and not focus on what went wrong in the end. This looks like your grandma having dementia for the rest at the end of her life and dying, and she couldn't even remember your name just before she died. Yes, you could sit around moping and focusing on the fact that your grandma didn't know who you are, but this is when you can never move on. The only time this actually happens, and this would be more important, if this person then never gets out of bed again, they stay in bed being depressed forever about how their grandma didn't know their name. Everyone, most people do eventually have to move on, and they do this by focusing on the fact that their grandma taught them how to bake cookies when they were 5. This is where it matters more. This is how people move on. No one wants to lie in bed forever. The only way for you to get your life together is to move on. We proved how this only happens on our side because you can't move on when you're focusing on how your boyfriend slept with someone that you think looks better than you. People focus more on how it lasted. This therefore helps them. This therefore just matters more. 10 years shapes you more than a month of being sad does. People don't lie in bed forever. People want to move on. This is where they make themselves focus on the contents of the relationship so they can either learn, grow, or just focus on the happy times, like their dad teaching them to ride a bike over the couple years where they're sad that their dad left them. This is where people internalize it to a higher weight, and this is where it matters more.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and as is customary, reverse the speaking order, meaning I invite up the negating reply.
The irrational emotion that you feel in the heat of a breakup or the heat of losing someone you love will never outweigh years of love and years of memories that you treasured with that person. Years of arguing and overcoming it together. Years of persevering through that struggle because you loved them and you cared about them, and because we innately care about the connection we have with other people more than the idea of losing them. So firstly on severity of emotion, then on the impact of the breakup, then on the longevity of emotion. Firstly on severity of emotion. They tell us that you're in your most vulnerable state and this changes your whole life. Why do we think this isn't severe? Firstly, we tell you down the line that the breakup isn't that deep, and in the vast majority of situations, breakups can be come to mutually, and that they do often end on good circumstances with people understanding. But secondly, that you don't want to blame yourself, you're probably in denial, you don't believe your ex's opinion if you are that angry, right? Thirdly, that you want to be happy. We get a really ungenerous response here, right? It doesn't require deep philosophical knowledge to realize that you prefer to be happy and you prefer to think about the good times and reminisce versus be depressed and sit in bed eating ice cream. I think I explained it pretty reasonably. But look, you just innately want happiness and to get out of Greece ASAP. But fourthly, even if you are emotional, it's just not real and it's not rational. We don't think that this type of emotion can be weighed more highly than the real quality of love and the real quality of anger that you had through a long continuation of a relationship. So why is it more severe on our side? Firstly, because you contribute to each other's lives, right? You associate memories with them, changes in identity. Maybe you picked up a new hobby with them, you got a promotion emotion with them. Secondly, you choose to prioritize the relationship over your busy life, which means you care about it deeply. Thirdly, that there are good feelings involved, right? It's not just one-sided like bad feelings. You actually have like the vulnerability of love, which we think is far more vulnerable than like some heat of the moment anger. But fourthly, it's like at least just symmetrical here, right? Because we get more fights on our side, we get more vulnerability on our side. Obviously, couples have arguments. We think it outweighs one irrational breakup argument. Then on the look, so at the end of that, I just think they just don't get this depth of emotion that they claim, and that like we can get far more depth of emotion over a far longer period of time. And no, the impacting I gave you at second about how their emotion only affects one side of the relationship. We affect both people, so we can at least win on scale there. But then on impact of the breakup, look, basically all they give us here is that like it forces you to change your identity and change your life. Like we tell you down the line that people just aren't that codependent, and realistically you're not changing that much, and it's easy to overcome those struggles. But note that they also kind of drop this after first, because I think it means for them that these people played a big role in their lives, and therefore the continuation of that relationship was significant if they did have to change their life. So on impact, we tell you that the bad things in a relationship shape their future. It's easier to move on when you recognize that the things that happen in that relationship maybe weren't that good, but it's also easier to realize the bad things, see signs, and stop bad habits from recurring in future relationships. And secondary to that we have good things, like it's easier to move on without getting caught up on what you could have done better at the very end, when you can just remember the good memories you have with your grandma, as opposed to her saying like you weren't her favorite child on her deathbed because she has dementia, right? Look, I think then we can win on the impact of the breakup because we get more future benefits. But then on longevity of emotion, look, they tell us that you think about the worst point and your self-confidence is damaged and you're constantly reminded. Look, I think we tell you pretty reasonably down the line that people aren't actively interested in your downfall. They don't want to know about like what, like they're just interested in like what happened leading up to it and why, not the details of that one fight where you like face some emotional trauma. They want to know what went wrong in that relationship and what were the good parts of it. They want to reminisce and make you feel better. Look, the fact is, people just aren't affected that deeply, and even if they were, that's good for us.
I thank the speaker for this speech, and to finish the debate, I invite up the affirmative reply.
I think that memories are not rational, and people are not rational. I think that if you think about the way that people's brains work, judges, you will realize that it is the thing that happened last. It is the thing that happened to us most strongly. It is the moment where someone told us that we were not good enough that created even an inkling of self-doubt that will live in our brain for many, many years. I think you will realize that that is the moment that will impact us in that time and going forward. I'm going to talk about 3 points. Firstly, what do we think the range of difference is for both like endings or the continuation? Secondly, on the changes that happen to you, and thirdly, on the experience. Firstly, what is the range of difference? I think that when we're talking about the continuation of the relationship, we've told you that there just aren't that many of the worst kind of relationships that Meg has tried to frame to you. I just think that there aren't that many abusive relationships that exist. Firstly, because like these relationships just are illegal, and so we think that probably there's some policing that maybe restricts this. I think that you probably believe that most people are not completely terrible. But basically, I think it's very clear that most people are willing to like say something terrible in a breakup because it's a very emotional time, as we've told you in our POI, compared to actually going and beating someone for like 10 years throughout their relationship. I think that means that the end of the relationship has a much larger capacity to either be very good or to be very bad. I think this immediately weighs up all of our content hugely. Okay. Furthermore, it's important to note that I think you just probably shouldn't buy when they tell you that only one person in a breakup can be vulnerable. Because at no point was any of our content on the vulnerability that you feel when you are in a breakup reliant on you being the person broken up with. I think that all of our mix can apply equally to both parties. When you're in such an emotional situation, you can say bad things to each other. Okay, secondly then, on changes that happen to you. I think we have a bunch of mix standing here that never got responded to, about the recency bias, about the fact that these memories are so strong because there's such strength of emotion, but also just that we think that people weigh negative stuff that happens to them way higher in their minds, they focus on it far more. Okay. Note that I don't think that all of this stuff about you're just going to realize that what he told you was wrong in 3 weeks is particularly strong, because we told you that things that can exist inside your brain, that you live in your own mind, that the self-doubt that can be created is incredibly powerful. Note also that I think if you just move on from the relationship, that probably requires you to move on from all of it, including the things you learned within the relationship. Because we told you that the things you learned within the relationship are inherently shaped by the ending of the relationship. We also told you that the ending of the relationship is going to be the thing that you remember most, that's going to be most clear in your mind. In order to move on from this, I therefore think you have to move on from everything. I don't think this changes the debate. Okay. Note that I think that the re-evaluation of all of these things that happened to you during your relationship based on the end was not responded to. I think this means that the end shapes everything, how you remember what happens. If the end is bad, if the end is good, it shapes all of their content. I think it's contingent on ours. Finally then, on experience. I think that our stuff still stands back from first, that it is uniquely difficult to escape your own head when you're going through the end of a breakup. I think we gave you content on why you're uniquely unable to access support systems because it is all-encompassing compared to when you're feeling bad over a number of years. I think this means that this experience is uniquely strong and uniquely difficult to get away from. I think the examples that they gave you of watching your grandmother forget your name as she dies is an incredibly traumatic experience and should be weighed very highly as an example of how the nature of the end can impact you greatly. Okay. Finally then, I think that there are lots and lots of things that you subconsciously carry on from this relationship that shape your experience massively. I think that even if your experience stretches out over 10 years, this framing of the relationship encompasses your whole life probably just is quite disingenuous. There are lots of other things that exist in your life only for this few-week period after a breakup that we tell you that the experience is all-encompassing, that it is so important.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I thank both teams for the debate. I invite you to cross the floor, shake hands, and if everyone can leave the room to let the judges deliberate.
Just to note from us on the panel, we do have a panel of 3 judges. I wouldn't expect no A to be ready in less than 15 minutes. We'll try and keep it prompt beyond that.